My name's Carl Allen. I'm the CEO and founder of Formative, and I'm going to introduce our special lead panelist or lead presenter here in just a moment. Give a little context of what we're going to talk about today. This is one of a series of ongoing webinars that Formative has hosted, and that will be posting on our Student Mobility Resource Hub. But this is actually special as well because it's a version of a presentation that we just gave a couple weeks ago at the Council of Great City Schools with a couple of partner districts, Chicago Public Schools being one and Prince George's County Schools being another. Today, we're going to focus on the great work of Chicago Public Schools and that partnership. And so excited to get into it. The presentation itself is going to be, as I said, recorded and posted to our Student Mobility Hub. We will also have time for questions at the end for both Mr. Mayfield and myself. But let me introduce Charles Mayfield, our featured presenter, Chief Operating Officer for Chicago Public Schools. Thank you for joining us, Charles.
Thanks, Carl. Happy to be here.
As I said, I'm Carl Allen, CEO of Formative Technologies. Just quickly about us, as I always do in these webinars, just Formative is a transportation strategy, technology, and management company. We actually roll up our sleeves and do the hard work of managing systems alongside and with district and charter school and state education agency partners, and also do a lot of consultative support work. I'll talk about that approach and kind of what we did here with in supporting the work of Chicago Public Schools. But then, also you can see some of our partners, varied partners around the country, and just excited about the approach to system transformation and holistic sustainability that really thinks broadly about new ways of providing support and access for students and reducing barriers for kids, whether that's through system design or, again, introducing new modes and other sorts of approaches. So excited to talk about that. The overview of how we approach our work is that with each of our, this is now for our consultative clients, but anytime we're working with the district, is to really understand deeply the specific context within which we're working, the specific needs, assets that are available. This is district by district, school by school, and also state by state. Understand it, see where it may be lacking in efficiency or having challenges or underperforming, doing in-depth analyses on areas of opportunity that we identify, and then working closely with our partners to empower them, build their capacity, and actually engage with stakeholders, iterating on potential solutions and finding, what's the pathway to actually practically implement things that might seem ideal in theory or after an analysis, but then going from theory to practice, and then working in the short and the long term with our partners to actually implement and see things through. And so going to talk a bit about that today in the context of the work with Chicago Public Schools. The work with Chicago started with, a very quick scan and understanding from them, and gaining a deep understanding of their current challenges, and then going from there to design and support implementation of specific solutions. But I'm going to have Charles tell the story, and then I'll kind of jump in as to the pieces that we did. But I'll turn it to you, Charles. Thank you.
That's perfect, Carl. Again, thanks for having me here. And I want to just also thank the Council of Great City Schools, because that was a good platform for us to be able to share our information with other school districts, and happy to share this information with you all who couldn't make it there. In a nutshell, let me just explain who I am, and then a little bit of background about the issue that we were dealing with. So again, I'm Charles Mayfield. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Chicago Public Schools. I've been with the district for about 15 years, and in this role, almost 3 years. Previous to that, I was the Chief Procurement Officer, and previous to that, a couple different odd jobs in procurement, also in the private sector, doing some service management, supply chain management, and also a 24-year veteran. So, learned a lot while I was in the Air Force, and it still sticks with me today. About Chicago Public Schools. So we are the third largest school district, always continuing to compete with Miami-Dade, but I think we're back at the third right now. In addition to that, We oversee over 600 schools, 634 to be exact. Of those, 522 are district-run campuses. The others are charters or non-public schools. Um, for transportation, we are 100% outsourced. So we do not own our own fleet. And we source out to all vendors. I believe it's about 22 or so vendors that we have to this day. And we transport to over 500 schools, about 540, both our district-run schools, to our charter schools, and to our non-public schools across a 235-mile radius. And you know, it may not sound like a lot to some folks, but when you have to deal with Chicago traffic, that's another beast in itself. Um, we transport about 18,000 students, roughly, and about 70% of those are students with disabilities. Over 100 are McKinney-Vento, and we do about 5,000 who are general education students. In context, I think let me start with that first bullet. We were dealing with an issue for a couple of years, our shrinking operator capacity. We just didn't have enough drivers to be able to transport all students that qualify for transportation. And like many of you, I'm sure this was an issue just with the national driver shortage in itself. And we had to look at varying different things. We had to look at pay. We had to look at the number of vehicles that you know our bus companies had. We also had to look at the market and really see what was going on. Even pre-pandemic, you know, it was an issue, but post-pandemic, it became really exacerbated, like a lot less drivers. And I know all of you love your Amazon deliveries. You love your Uber and Lyfts, and I don't mean to name drop some companies, but when you talk about drivers, that's where they all went. So, and in doing so, those drivers were able to get more flexibility in their schedules. Because when you think about a bus driver in itself, it's a split schedule. Doesn't sound as I would say as happy as it could be. And with these other outfits, you could at least try to control your own schedule. And the competitive pay was a big issue. Like those other outfits just paid a little bit more. And you had to deal with less people. And in some cases, you got to love kids if you're going to be a bus driver. So we had to deal with that shrinking operator capacity to try to figure out how we can get drivers back to the table, back to the seats behind the wheels of buses. We were also dealing with the Illinois State Board of Education complaint. And that complaint was really around travel times for our students with disabilities. And that's a big deal, right? We had travel times that exceeded 60 minutes, sometimes closer to 70, 80, or 90 minutes. And you had some families who were really concerned that the travel times were just too long. And so they filed a state complaint with ISB, and we worked with ISB together to try to figure that piece out. Why were our travel times so long? And it goes back to a couple things: Chicago traffic. It also goes back to we had some schools where we were transporting students 30 miles or more. With ISB, where we landed is that 60 minutes was the right thing to do, and also the standard that they wanted to stick to. And so we had to figure out different ways to be able to meet that expectation within reason. Again, like I said, it was the right thing to do, because you don't want children on the bus longer than 60 minutes because, you know, agitation, just a number of things happen with, especially with students who have severe or profound disabilities. It's just not a good look. So the next phase we worked on was to figure out that 60-minute requirement. We really had to take a step back in part of our research and evaluation and said, all right, the only way we can do this the right way is to make sure that we prioritize our students that require transportation. So we had to pause on some students that we couldn't transport who actually qualified. And so what does that mean? So we work with our board, and our board, we helped develop in partnership a policy, a resolution that basically said that we would prioritize students, Group A being students with disabilities and students that experience homelessness. Group B would be general education students, and then Group C, and so on and so forth. In our case, we had a consent decree that was published around the 80s, where it was a significant issue about equity within the school district in itself. And what it led to is part of this consent decree, it required us to transport students to option schools. And so that consent decree, although it started in the 80s, it ended around 2009. But although it ended in 2009, again, we're all about doing the right things. We continued transportation because we had enough drivers to be able to do that. So we continued on even until this day. We are routing general education students to option schools. But, a couple of years ago, we had to pause that, and we had to pause it based on that prioritization because we just didn't have enough drivers to be able to do so. It takes about 1,300 drivers for us to be able to transport all students that qualify. At the time when we made the decision, a little bit after the decision was made, we only had about a little bit over 600 drivers to be able to transport just a select amount of students. And then last but not least, we had budgetary constraints, just like everyone else. ESSER dollars were coming up on expiration. We had a number of other priorities that we needed to combat. And so we needed to figure out a way to do more with less. And that's where Formative stepped in and helped us to be able to do that. So a couple things that we're going to talk about is how we increased our service capacity, how we eliminated, our financial incentive program. In essence, we had a financial incentive program, what we call FIP. And in this case, we were paying families to self-transport. And this is still happening today. So we didn't fully eliminate it, but what we did is we significantly reduced that, and we'll talk more about that. And then just to give you some basic understanding of the risk and rewards of just, intervention in itself, on how we made some changes, some iterative changes throughout our journey to be able to be successful of where we are today.
So I'll speak a little bit to, how we approached the problem. Thank you, Charles. And, the first thing was just getting to that deep level of understanding of what the goals were, what the constraints were, the history, and what our kind of parameters were within which we could work. The district already had a good sense that, bell times was an area of opportunity. Also, that there was opportunity to optimize on the curb-to-curb special ed service. And they had this idea of could we restore some service to these option students through something like a hub stop design. So we had these hypotheses in place. We knew the context, and we also knew that with respect to bell time shifts, we wanted to take a pragmatic approach because we had a short time frame. Bell time shifts are a hard thing to get through with school communities, asking them to change, schedules for staff and students and families. And so we wanted to be very pragmatic on that from that standpoint. And also the fact that, because they were primarily transporting students with special needs and that were experiencing homelessness, it wasn't the full student population. And so that's another challenge, to ask a school community to move bell times to accommodate transportation for just some of their students. So that was some of the context we had to work with. We undertook what we call a stability sprint, which is, okay, knowing this and knowing these hypotheses that we have in place, we're going to scan across the system to understand, okay, what is the opportunity with bell times? What would the impact be if we were to make changes? What's the opportunity? Where is there opportunity to optimize on the routing side? And what could a hub stop model look like? And so that was the first phase. The stability sprint then revealed that, yes, we could advance very targeted, pragmatic bell time adjustments to a set of schools that would have maximal impact in terms of allowing the routing team to lengthen routes and also allowing them to better pair routes so as to get more trips out of each vehicle that they were running. We also noted opportunities to just simply route differently, route better, and enhance utilization on the vehicles that they were routing. A lot of that, again, coinciding with just the ability to lengthen some routes. But we noted that, with changing bell times, but even absent that, there were places where there was slack where routes could be lengthened and vehicles could be utilized more. Mode shifting, we identified that there was still a large number of students, gen ed and students with transportation as a related service that could use public transit. There were opportunities to use more non-CDL vans, and also kind of outlined this hub stop opportunity. One big area of opportunity that's more of a long-term question and effort that Charles can speak to too is identified that there should be and there ought to be differentiated ways to support students with special needs. Not all of their needs were the same, and they didn't all necessarily need door-to-door service. And so working with the district to think about, over the long term, how you could work with IEP teams, the special education department to, trying to transition students to a least restrictive environment. Maybe that could be, instead of door-to-door service, closest, safest corner, even a regular kind of gen ed corner stop or a hub stop, or even using public transit. And that over time, starting to build in that service differentiation was a big opportunity to create additional efficiencies. And then that there were some in the area of how the district managed these vendors, how they communicated with them, how they screened and maintained the billings, made sure that they were being paid according to their bid and contracted formulas, and that liquidated damages and so on, and other items that were part of those contracts were being managed differently, that was another area of opportunity. So having done some analysis then with a hub stop model, with shifting some students to public transit or walking, with re-optimizing the routes, what the formative team was able to show was that it was possible to basically do more with the fleet that the district was expecting to have to serve an additional 2,800 students on the curb-to-curb network. Also to they're using the current fleet, so serve all the students they needed to serve, rather, thereby reducing the parent payment program that they were using because they couldn't provide that service. Also, that they could accommodate a good number of students with a hub stop model, those students that were attending the option schools, that a large number of students could use public transit. And so in sum, that there was essentially going from 8,200, the potential to transport and provide support in some fashion to up to 19,000 students by executing these strategies all together. But of course, this is now kind of the end, where theory stops and now where practice begins. And then we had, take the next step of, if, this is the scope of the opportunity with these different strategies, how could we actually start pragmatically implementing these things, knowing that we weren't going to get to this idealized perfect vision, but what could we actually do? And so now I'm going to turn it back to kind of what happened this last year.
Yeah, so part of the big, lessons that we learned out of this and implementation were a couple things, right? And I can tell you, folks, Chicago Public Schools has 19 a.m. and 55 p.m. bell times, right? Let me repeat that again, 19 a.m. and 55 p.m. bell times. That's quite a bit. We were in a state at one point where principal autonomy was the criteria, of our district. It's part of our values, part of our principles. And, it was previous to me being in this role, but it was a decision to allow that flexibility. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but what it led to is it created a bunch of inefficiencies when it comes to transportation. And in our case, changing bell times, just like with any other school district, is probably one of the hardest things to do, right? And so when we got the research from Formative, we were able to analyze it with them, and we were able to partner in prioritizing and, who were the highest schools, the medium schools, the lower schools from a risk standpoint that would give us the most bang for our buck to be able to change the bell times and then pair accordingly. And when we looked at the data, I mean, there were some that were 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or even up to an hour. In our case, we thought 15 minutes would probably be the best sweet spot to be able to have a real conversation with some of the principals and their communities. Because again, you can't do it without community, and have those conversations about what was possible. And in our case, we landed on about 35 schools where we could change their bell times between 10 and 15 minutes. Again, that wasn't an easy thing to do, But when we made the practical case of explaining that this would create more efficiencies for the district, we'd be able to transport more students. It was a little bit of an easier sell. And in some cases, I think maybe one or two, we had to go to a voluntold case. And, not what we had liked to do, but again, this is being able to serve as many students as possible, especially with students with disabilities, our most vulnerable students and students that experience homelessness. So it's really important. So with the 35 schools that changed, that was a win. And we're still continuing to do that cycle every year because it's an iterative process. I mean, you can't do just one thing and think it's going to fix it all, which leads me to my next point. We were able to transport more students via the curb to curb service based on that. And this is data that we extracted from March, because we're a district, just like most of you, who get transportation requests throughout the year. So we get some in just about every day when it comes to our student population, and we have to make adjustments on the fly. With that, we also had this recruitment effort that we were really publicizing in partnership with our vendors that provide transportation services for us. And keep in mind, we didn't just use Yellow Bus. We used the smaller vehicles. We were even down at one point to using taxi cabs to be able to transport students. If we could find the bus aid to help support, and we had a vehicle that worked really well, and they, went through our procurement process, we were actually using them just to make sure that we accounted for every student in need to be able to provide services. So what we did do is, what we really focused on was really a campaign to hire more bus drivers. Because again, that population of folks who were usually most retirees had transitioned out for a number of reasons. Some of the vendors that I told you earlier, from a commercial standpoint, the Amazons, the Ubers, the Lyft. And so this was a new recruitment effort where we had to increase wages a little bit to be able to get more drivers in, where we had to insert a retention bonus to be able to keep the drivers that were existing, that were already there. And we really worked with other city partners to be able to engage and create some excitement of being a bus driver. One of the pipelines that we had worked out with and talked to our counterpart, Chicago Transit Authority, was that, is there a way we can try to build a pipeline where they're just a school bus driver for a couple of years, and then they can transition over to the Chicago Transit Authority? So, conversations like that helped create or ignite some excitement about being a school bus driver, which led us to, increase vehicles and increase student participation. We created a new hub stop, right? So again, for our general education students, where we had created prioritization, we had to pause on transportation for a while with them, but incrementally, we were able, through the support of Formative with the data, build out hub stops to be able to give them the transportation that they needed. And we created hub stops at 18 that service 18 of our option schools. That's working really well today. We were able to come up with some guidelines, some rules for parent drop-off, which was really important, to stay with their students until they got on the bus and to make sure that they're there when they arrive. And this created a lot more excitement, around parents being more encouraged not to, transfer students out of the school to be able to find another school, which creates, chaos for families. So I was happy that we were able to accomplish that. And last but not least, like I said in the beginning, we tried to do our best to focus on what happens if we could eliminate the financial incentive program. And the financial incentive program was a program where we paid families up to $500 a month based upon attendance. And in this case, we had nearly close to 4,000, so 3,700 families on this financial incentive program to self-transport. Well, our goal was to get away from self-transport and to be able to provide direct transportation services to them, because there were some families who really needed it and who had a hard time not being able to get their students to school because of their own capacity, their own, family capacities of transportation, maybe not having a vehicle or something else, or maybe not having a family member to help. And in our case, we were able to reduce the financial incentive program from that 3,700 to just 140 students because of the models of driver recruitment, the hub stop implementation, the recruitment efforts. We were able to get more drivers to get more seat utilization out of the data that was shared with Formative. So it was really impressive on how we were able to make that change in such a short amount of period of time. So with that, let me turn it back to Carl.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I think I can speak a little bit to just on the lessons learned for us. I think it validates the approach that each of these big districts like Chicago, like the contexts are so unique, the approaches that are going to work, are so unique and need to be tailored, right? And so it took that just real granular, deep and broad understanding first, and then like really targeted interventions that were designed in collaboration. You need good data and kind of smart approaches, but then pragmatic implementation in a really targeted fashion with buy-in from leadership and buy-in from different stakeholder groups, and that these things take time.
Yep.
Pretty remarkable, I think, in terms of what you were able to do with the bell times you were able to shift, what you were able to stand up and do on the driver front, all the varied efforts beyond what we were doing to have that big of an impact in such a short period of time. But then I think knowing that there's lots of work ahead and a lot of this is continuous, right? So, highlighting that there's still more opportunities on how we're managing vendors and keeping costs down and expanding the mix, maintaining those efficiencies and expanding those on the curb to curb service, finding ways to expand and tweak, grow that hub stop service. And then, like the longer term element we were talking about on, move to a least restrictive environment being another area. But maybe you could also comment as a last word here, Charles, on just, what were the any other kind of key takeaways for you, and then the next steps for the district?
Yeah, I think what's really important now is that we don't want to give up. I know most school districts will be experiencing the loss of ESSER dollars, and they may have used some of those funds for transportation. In our case, that was us as well. So we are focused right now on improving our vendor services. So working with vendors right now, planning for next year. What other efficiencies can we build in as a partner to be able to provide services for all students that qualify? I think it's also important that we also look at maintaining any curb-to-curb efficiencies. To your point, when you talk about least restrictive environment, I think there's an element there where we can help students with disabilities continue to build life skills and to be able to be more independent and maybe shifting, from a curb to curb to maybe a hub stop. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen overnight. That's going to happen in partnership with principals. That's going to happen in partnership with communities. That's going to happen in partnership with all of the stakeholders to be able to get us to that point where those life skills, like I say, are really important, because there's a life after being a student. So we'll continue to have some exploration in that. And then continuing to expand that hub stop model. It's working really well. It helps create more seat utilization of what we need for some of the larger buses that we have, because we have all types within our district with our vendor partners. And I think, for us, it's really about being as efficient as possible as we continue to transport throughout that 235-mile square radius with Chicago traffic.
No shortage of ongoing challenges. Even as you fix one thing, there's new curveballs thrown at you. That's just the fun of the business.
That's right.
So happy to take questions at this time. I think we did pretty well on time. I don't know if I'll go to the chat here and see if Jesse, I don't know if anything has come in. Otherwise, I've got a couple maybe that I might shoot your way, Charles, but I want to see what we've gotten from the audience, if anything. I'll give folks a second.
Sounds good.
Well, one thing, and maybe as we give folks a chance to think and throw some things in the chat, you mentioned um, you mentioned some of the risks and thinking about funding. I wonder what else do you see? I know you're wanting to advance the bell time work, wanting to advance this really hard LRE work potentially and maintaining efficiencies. What are the other kinds of just, thinking for, I see there's other district folks in the audience, like what are the blockers and other risks that you see just in terms of navigating, the various stakeholder groups and the things as a what transportation typically faces as for, trying to implement system-wide change or being a part of system-wide change, like what are those other blockers and risks that you see maybe internal to the district that you're working to navigate?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one unintended consequence is as we were recruiting more, again, the population was typically retirees that will come in and do the service. And not to say that we got away from that. You still have retirees, but there's also a new batch of recruitment of drivers who are younger. And one unintended consequence that I see as a result of that is where you may have a seasoned retiree who, maybe someone looks up to, respecting more elderly folks. The behavior is a little bit different now, right? And so I think with some of the younger drivers, they need to be coached and to get more experience around how to handle issues where it could be some conflict or how to handle issues with the severe or profound students with disability to be able to react accordingly. That's what I'm seeing as an observation right now that my team it reports back to me from time to time and some of the vendors. I think one other element to consider is that bell times will continue to be one of the pieces that is significantly important. And I want to highlight that again, only because it's very difficult to do, right? It's easier said than done. And so we still want to make sure that we are connected with our school leaders, connected with our communities to make sure that they understand the benefits of what that change is. Because, I always say operations is the bloodline of the district. Like, in order to keep the district running, is if we can be as efficient as possible, it creates the stabilization of what students need. Because when you think about transportation, it's the first classroom that students experience. And with it being that first classroom, we want to make sure that we're providing top-notch service and to just be able to get them on the bus and be able to get them to school. One last piece that I will say about another challenge that we may be experiencing, and I'm not sure if this is happening across, other school districts as well. But what we're finding is that to be able to get the CDL, it really is and sometimes an arduous process, a very lengthy process. And so we recently worked with our Secretary of State to help ignite and acquiesce to giving us the under the hood waiver. I've actually had some folks on the transportation team at CPS go take the test just to see what the experience is like. And one component is that when you have to know the engine components of a semi truck that's not even a yellow school bus, it creates a barrier. And so we're trying to figure out ways to alleviate those barriers so that we can get more drivers in to be able to do the great work to be able to transport students.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. All right, we do have a bunch of questions now come in. Let me see if we can hit some of these. Thank you for folks putting these in. One question is about savings with all the changes that you implemented. Can you quantify a dollar amount or percentage of savings? And I would say, well, I'll let you speak to this, Charles, but it wasn't about, I mean, y'all had a budget and there was constraints around funding. The idea was how do we transport as many students as possible. It wasn't about savings per se. Maybe I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. And I know we always like to quantify like the dollar amount. In this case, we were trying to quantify more of the seat utilization. So, you know, you can have these components of, well, reduction of buses or reduction of paratransit. And in our case, that wasn't, you know, a focus. It was, though, a reduction of, you know, could we use less paratransit and increase the economies of scales to get more of those available seats filled with students, which was significantly important for us.
Yeah,
And
so
I
big.
tell you, even before you ask your next question, I couldn't have done this. And I'm not the transportation guy per se. I'm just the person who helped our transportation team be able to get over the hump and to the finish line on this thing. And in our case, I've got a stellar transportation team. I'm telling you, these individuals work day and night to make sure that we were able to transport all students that qualified. Did we get there? I would say about 90%. There were some students that we weren't able to get to in our case, but we never gave up.
Question here about public transit. Is there an age limit of students you have riding public transit? How many students use public transit? And do you have a contract set up or a formal partnership with CTA?
That's a great question. So we do have an agreement set up with CTA. The agreement is for our transportation cars, or what we call our venture cars. And I failed to mention this earlier, so that's why I'm happy that the question was posed. We use that as an alternate mode of transportation. So if a general education student qualified for transportation, we would offer up a transportation pass to them, a venture car pass, so they can get to and from school. It starts from like fourth grade, well, third grade. No, it starts from pre-K actually on up. But in our case, what we did is we wanted to make sure that not only the student, but also the parent or companion had a venture car pass as well to transport the student. That went all the way up to I believe about seventh or eighth grade, and because you know students seventh and eighth grade they can self-transport with their own bus pass. So in our case, that worked really well. We actually got more increased ridership from what the Chicago Transit Authority reported back to us, which was a good thing because again they were in a similar situation with the national driver shortage, where they had less utilization of transportation in itself. So it's important that if you don't have that relationship with your public transit, that you create one.
But on CTA, they have a specific policy around ages of students that can ride without parent supervision. Is that right?
Maybe I'm not
I think
familiar
it's a
with that
must.
off
I
the
think
top
well,
of
you
my
must
head.
have
Yep.
middle school students that ride as well, but the focus is with you all as high school students.
Yep.
When I was director of transportation at Boston Public Schools, we worked with the MBTA and actually had, starting with an opt-in program, middle school students as low as sixth grade riding transit, where we determined that it was feasible. And in some cases, feasible actually meant, and this is where, and the CTA is similar, where there's train rides, that can sometimes be way better than what a bus could do, depending on where you're going. So it was like when we identified the students, whose journeys were at par with or better than Yellow Bus and offered them the option, we had a really high degree of uptake of even down to the sixth grade level of families that wanted those monthly passes, and that, whose kids were accustomed to riding trains and buses, or, that was one of the kind of life skills they wanted to have them learn, was how to navigate that system. And with some of the supports we offered, that was part of, it was just part of the thing that you wanted to see kids progress in their ability to navigate the city. So it was a real positive thing.
Real positive. And, I think that's just the right thing to do because and we can get into a whole thing about raising kids, but independency, right? You want kids to be independent at some point. So I think that's just a good tool to be able to get them there.
Great. Well, I think some more questions here that had come in, but I think I want to stick to time and respect folks' time here. And we've hit our goal of where I wanted to close. So thanks everyone for coming, and thank you Chief Mayfield, for your presentation. Really remarkable work that you all have done in Chicago, and excited to see how you progress with it. So thank you, and thanks to everybody who attended today.
Thanks so much, Carl. Thank you, you and your organization, Formative, for being able to help us out. Look forward to continuing our partnership. And again, want to thank my transportation team, because obviously you can't do it without a team. So there's no I in team. So thanks again, folks.
Bye all. Thank you.